I glanced at the clock, 2:37 a.m. My fingers trembled as I scrolled through Jason's phone, each message from Megan like a dagger to my heart. How long had this been going on? I'd suspected, but seeing the evidence. The bedroom door creaked. I looked up to see Jason, his face a mask of fury. "What the hell are you doing?" he snarled, snatching the phone from my hands. "I could ask you the same thing." I shot back, my voice steadier than I felt. "Who's Megan?" Jason's laugh was cold. "You're pathetic, Sarah. Snooping through my phone like some desperate housewife." "Answer the question, Jason." He shrugged, a cruel smile playing on his lips. "What does it matter? You've been a disappointment for years. No kids, no career. What exactly do you bring to this marriage?" The words stung, but I refused to let him see me cry. "I've given you everything, Jason. My love, my support dash. And look where that's gotten us," he interrupted, reaching into his nightstand. He pulled out a manila envelope and tossed it onto the bed. "If you think you can do better, leave." My hands shook as I opened the envelope. Divorce papers. I looked up at him, searching for any hint of the man I'd married 15 years ago. There was nothing but contempt in his eyes. "Without me, you'll be all alone by yourself," Jason sneered. Something snapped inside me. Years of doubts, of swallowing my pride, of making excuses for his behavior. It all came rushing to the surface. Yeah, I'll be alone by myself," I retorted, grabbing a pen from the nightstand. "Is that all you want to say?" Jason's eyes widened as I began filling out the divorce papers right there in front of him. My hand was steady now, my resolve growing with each line I completed. "You're bluffing," he said, but I heard the uncertainty in his voice. I looked up at him, feeling a strange mix of sorrow and liberation. "No, Jason. I'm done." The hospital corridor smelled of disinfectant and despair. I hesitated outside Helen's room, my hand on the doorknob. How could I face her after what had happened with Jason? Taking a deep breath, I pushed the door open. Helen's face lit up when she saw me. "Sarah, dear. What a lovely surprise." I forced a smile, moving to her bedside. Her leg was propped up, encased in a bulky cast. "How are you feeling, Helen?" "Oh, bit sore but I'll mend." She patted my hand. "Now, tell me what's new with you and Jason. Any grandchildren on the horizon yet?" The question hit me like a punch to the gut. I struggled to maintain my composure, avoiding her eyes. We. Helen's brow furrowed. "Sarah, what's wrong?" I couldn't bring myself to tell her about the divorce papers, about Jason's betrayal. Not when she was lying here, injured and vulnerable. "Nothing," I lied. "Just worried about you." She squeezed my hand. "Nonsense. I'm tough as old boots. Now, what's really bothering you?" I met her gaze, seeing the concern in her eyes. Suddenly, I felt overwhelmed by everything. Jason's infidelity, the impending divorce, and now Helen's accident. Tears welled up, and before I could stop them, they were streaming down my face. "Oh, sweetheart," Helen murmured, pulling me into an awkward hug. "Tell me everything." Between sobs, I poured out the whole story, the text messages, the confrontation, the divorce papers. Helen listened silently, her face growing more troubled with each revelation. When I finished, she sighed heavily. "I'm so sorry, Sarah. I had no idea Jason was. I should have seen the signs." "It's not your fault," I assured her, wiping my eyes. "No, but I raised him. I thought I'd taught him better." She shook her head. "What will you do now?" The question hung in the air, heavy with implications. I realized I hadn't thought beyond signing those papers. "I don't know," I admitted. "I just know I can't stay with him anymore." Helen nodded, her expression resolute. "You'll stay with me," she declared. "Once I'm out of this blasted hospital, of course." "Helen, I couldn't possibly dash." "Nonsense," she interrupted. "Your family, Sarah. We'll face this together." As I left the hospital that evening, I felt a glimmer of hope for the first time in years. I had no idea what the future held, but knowing I had Helen's support made it seem a little less daunting. Little did I know, the real storm was yet to come. I paced the living room, my eyes darting to the clock every few minutes. Jason was late again. The house felt suffocating, filled with memories of happier times that now seemed like cruel jokes. As I waited, My mind raced with questions about Helen, the divorce, and what my future held. The front door slammed, jolting me from my thoughts. Jason stumbled in, reeking of alcohol and cheap perfume. "Where have you been?" I demanded, my voice trembling with anger and hurt. He sneered, tossing his keys on the table. "Out. What are you, my mother?" The mention of his mother ignited a new fury in me. "Speaking of which, why haven't you visited Helen in the hospital?" "She broke her leg, Jason. She needs us." "She's alive, isn't she?" he scoffed. "Then it's not a big deal." I stared at him, incredulous. "Not a big deal? She's your mother." "Look," he snarled, stepping closer, "I don't need you nagging me about my mother on top of everything else. If you're so concerned, you take care of her." Something inside me snapped. "You know what? I will. At least she appreciates me." Jason's eyes narrowed. "What's that supposed to mean?" "It means I'm done, Jason. I'm moving out to take care of Helen during her recovery." He laughed, a harsh, mocking sound. "You wouldn't dare. You've got nowhere else to go." I met his gaze, standing my ground. "Watch me." Without waiting for a response, I stormed upstairs and began throwing clothes into a suitcase. My hands shook, but my resolve was firm. As I packed, I could hear Jason shouting from downstairs, threats and insults blending into a cacophony of anger. When I came back down, suitcase in hand, Jason blocked the door. "If you walk out that door, don't bother coming back," he hissed. I looked at him, this man I had once loved, and felt nothing but pity. "Goodbye, Jason." As I drove to Helen's house, tears streamed down my face. But for the first time in years, they weren't tears of sadness or fear. They were tears of relief, of freedom. I pulled into Helen's driveway, took a deep breath, and knocked on the door. As it swung open, I saw the surprise and concern on Helen's face. "Sarah, what's wrong? What are you doing here so late?" I managed a weak smile. "I hope that offer to stay with you is still open. I think I'm going to need it." Helen's arms were around me in an instant, and in that moment, I knew I had made the right choice. The road ahead would be difficult, but I wasn't alone anymore. The days at Helen's house fell into a comfortable rhythm. I'd help her with physical therapy in the mornings, make lunch, and spend afternoons chatting or watching her favorite game shows. It was a stark contrast to the tension-filled silences that had dominated my life with Jason. One evening, as I was preparing dinner, Helen called me into the living room. Her face was serious, and my heart skipped a beat. "Sarah, dear, we need to talk," she said, patting the seat next to her. I sat down, anxiety building in my chest. "Is everything okay, Helen?" She took a deep breath. "I've been thinking a lot about what you told me, about Jason and the divorce." She paused, her eyes filled with a mix of sadness and determination. "I've made a decision. I'm changing my will." My mouth fell open. "Helen, no. You don't have to dash." She held up a hand, silencing me. "I do, Sarah. Jason, he's not the man I thought he was. The way he's treated you, his own wife, and he hasn't even bothered to visit me once since I've been home."
Tears welled up in my eyes. "But he's your son. And you're the daughter I never had," Helen said firmly. "I'm disqualifying Jason from my inheritance. I want you to have it." I stared at her, stunned. "Helen, I can't accept that. It's too much." She squeezed my hand. "You can and you will. You deserve a fresh start, Sarah. A chance to build the life you've always wanted." Before I could respond, the front door burst open. Jason stormed in, his face contorted with rage. "What the hell is going on here?" he shouted. Helen stood up, her voice steady. "Jason, this is my house. You can't just barge in." "Shut up, Mom," he snarled, turning to me. "You think you can turn my own mother against me? You gold-digging bitch." I flinched at his words, but Helen stepped between us. "That's enough, Jason. I won't have you speaking to Sarah like that in my home." Jason's eyes darted between us, realization dawning on his face. "You're changing your will, aren't you? Cutting me out for her?" The room fell silent. I looked at Helen, saw the resolve in her eyes, and made a decision. I wouldn't let her face this alone. Yes, Jason, I said, my voice stronger than I felt. Helen's changing her will. And there's nothing you can do about it. Jason's face turned an alarming shade of red. He pointed at me, his fingers shaking with fury. This isn't over. You'll regret this, both of you. As he stormed out, slamming the door behind him, I turned to Helen. We shared a look of understanding. There was no going back now. Whatever came next, we'd face it together. I stood in our bedroom, methodically folding clothes into a suitcase. Each item felt like a memory I was packing away, some bitter, some sweet. The house was quiet, save for the ticking of the clock on the nightstand. I glanced at it nervously, knowing Jason would be home soon. As if on cue, I heard the front door slam. Heavy footsteps thundered up the stairs, and suddenly Jason was there, filling the doorway with his imposing presence. "What the hell is this?" he demanded, gesturing at my half-packed suitcase. I took a deep breath, steeling myself. "I'm leaving, Jason. It's over." His face contorted with rage. "You ungrateful bitch. After everything I've done for you?" "Done for me?" I laughed bitterly. "You mean the lies? The cheating? The constant put-downs?" Jason stepped closer, his voice dropping to a menacing growl. "If you don't do what I tell you to do, we're divorced." I met his gaze, surprised by the calm I felt. "Then do it." "I'm busy getting ready to move out." For a moment, he looked stunned. Then his eyes narrowed. "You think you can just walk away? Where will you go? You're nothing without me." Before I could respond, we heard the front door open. "Sarah? Are you up there?" Helen's voice called out. Jason's face paled. "What's she doing here?" I pushed past him, hurrying down the stairs. Helen stood in the entryway, her face set with determination. "Helen, you shouldn't be here," I started, but she held up a hand to silence me. "I'm exactly where I need to be," she said firmly. Then, looking past me to Jason, who had followed me down, she added, "We need to talk, son." What followed was a confrontation I never could have imagined. Helen, with a strength I'd never seen before, laid out everything: Jason's behavior, his neglect, and her decision about the inheritance. "I'm changing my will," she declared. "Sarah will be my heir, not you, Jason." The silence that followed was deafening. Jason's face cycled through shock, anger, and finally, a cold calculation that sent chills down my spine. "You can't do this," he snarled. "I'm your son." Helen stood her ground. "A son who has forgotten what family means. Sarah has shown me more love and care in these past weeks than you have in years." As Jason launched into a tirade, hurling accusations and threats, I felt a strange sense of calm wash over me. This was it, the moment everything changed. I looked at Helen, saw the unwavering support in her eyes, and made my decision. "Enough, Jason," I said, my voice stronger than I'd ever heard it. "It's over. I'm leaving, and there's nothing you can do about it." As I turned to go back upstairs and finish packing, I knew the road ahead would be difficult. But for the first time in years, I felt hope. With Helen by my side, I was ready to face whatever came next. I stood in the driveway, my hands shaking as I loaded the last of my boxes into Helen's car. The morning sun cast long shadows across the lawn, a stark contrast to the darkness I felt inside. This was it, the final goodbye to the life I'd known for so long. As I closed the trunk, a sleek red sports car screeched to a halt in front of the house. A young woman, probably in her early 30s, stepped out. Her eyes darted between me and the packed car, confusion etched on her face. "Is Jason home?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly. My heart sank as realization dawned. "You must be Megan," I said, surprised by the calmness in my voice. Her eyes widened. "How do you know my name? Are you his wife?" I nodded, watching as the color drained from her face. "Yes, and I'll be seeking alimony in our divorce." Megan stumbled back, her hand flying to her mouth. "Divorce?" "But he told me he said you two were already." Before I could respond, the front door burst open. Jason stormed out, his face contorted with rage. What the hell is going on here? For a moment, we all stood frozen, a tableau of betrayal and broken promises. Then, everything exploded at once. Megan turned on Jason, tears streaming down her face. You lied to me. You said you were divorced. Jason's eyes darted between us, panic replacing anger. Megan, baby, I can explain. Don't bother, I cut in, a strange sense of calm washing over me. I think we've all heard enough of your explanations, Jason. As Megan and Jason continued to argue, I felt a surge of determination. This was the proof I needed not just for the divorce, but for myself. I pulled out my phone and started recording their confrontation. Jason, noticing my actions, lunged towards me. Give me that phone, you bitch. I stepped back, keeping the camera steady. Touch me, and I'll add assault to the list of charges. He froze, his face a mask of impotent fury. In that moment, I saw him clearly for the first time, not as the man I had loved, but as a small, angry person who had controlled me for far too long. It's over, Jason, I said, my voice steady. You've lost everything, your wife, your mother's trust, and now your girlfriend. I hope it was worth it. As I got into Helen's car and drove away, leaving Jason and Megan still arguing in the driveway, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders. The road ahead was uncertain, but for the first time in years, I was ready to face it on my own terms. Courthouse loomed before me, its stone facade imposing and cold. I took a deep breath, smoothing down my suit jacket. Helen squeezed my hand reassuringly as we climbed the steps. You've got this, Sarah, she whispered. Inside, the tension was palpable. Jason sat at the opposite table, his lawyer whispering urgently in his ear. When he caught my eye, his face twisted into a sneer. As the judge entered and proceedings began, I felt a strange calm settle over me. This was it, the culmination of years of pain, lies, and betrayal. Jason's lawyer went first, painting me as a gold digger, trying to take advantage of a misunderstanding in our marriage. I clenched my fists under the table, willing myself to stay composed. When it was our turn, my lawyer presented the evidence, the text messages, the video of Jason's confrontation with Megan, financial records showing his mismanagement of our joint accounts. With each piece of evidence, I saw Jason's confidence crumble.
Then came the bombshell, Helen's testimony. She spoke of Jason's neglect, his manipulative behavior, and her decision to change her will. Jason's face turned ashen as his mother, voice unwavering, declared her intention to make me her heir. During a recess, Jason cornered me in the hallway, his eyes wild. You won't get anything, he hissed. I'll make sure of it. I met his gaze, surprised by my own strength. I'll get what I deserve, Jason. And so will you. Back in the courtroom, the judge's gavel fell like a thunderclap. In light of the evidence presented, this court rules in favor of the plaintiff, Sarah. The rest of the judge's words faded into background noise as relief washed over me. It was over. I had won. Jason exploded from his seat, shouting obscenities. As security restrained him, our eyes met one last time. In that moment, I saw the truth. The man I had feared for so long was nothing but a scared, angry boy. Outside the courthouse, Helen hugged me tightly. It's a new beginning, Sarah, she said, her eyes shining with tears and pride. As we walked down the steps, I felt lighter than I had in years. The road ahead was uncertain, but for the first time, I was excited to see where it might lead. With Helen by my side and my newfound strength, I was ready to face whatever came next. The sun was setting as we drove away, casting a golden glow over the city. I smiled, realizing that this wasn't just the end of my marriage, it was the beginning of my life. The morning sun streamed through the kitchen windows, casting a warm glow over Helen's newly renovated home. I sipped my coffee, watching as Helen expertly flipped pancakes on the griddle. It was hard to believe that just a few months ago, she'd been in a hospital bed with a broken leg. You're getting pretty good at those, I remarked, smiling. Helen chuckled. Well, I've had a great teacher. She turned to me, her eyes twinkling. You know, Sarah, I never thought I'd say this, but I'm glad things turned out the way they did. I raised an eyebrow. Even with everything that happened with Jason? She nodded, her expression turning serious. Especially because of that. It opened my eyes to who he really was, and it brought you into my life in a way I never expected. As we sat down to eat, I reflected on the whirlwind of the past few months. The divorce, the legal battles, the emotional upheaval. It had all been worth it to get to this moment of peace. I've been thinking, Helen said, breaking into my thoughts. We can be a real family if we care for each other, even if we're not connected by blood. Her words hit me like a wave of warmth. Helen, I dash. She held up a hand, smiling. Let me finish. I know you're worried about the future, about being alone. But you're not alone, Sarah. You have me, and I have you. We're family now. Tears welled up in my eyes. Thank you, I whispered, reaching across the table to squeeze her hand.
Just then, the doorbell rang.
We exchanged puzzled glances before I went to answer it. To my shock, Jason stood on the porch, looking haggard and unkempt. Sarah, I dash. What are you doing here? I demanded, my body tensing. He held up his hands. I'm not here to cause trouble. I wanted to apologize. To both of you. Helen appeared behind me, her voice firm. Jason, I think you should leave. He nodded, his shoulders slumping. I understand. I just wanted to say,
I'm sorry.
For everything. As he turned to go, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet, but it was closure. Closing the door, I turned to Helen. She pulled me into a tight hug, and in that moment, I knew she was right. We were family, bound not by blood, but by choice and love. As we returned to our breakfast, I felt a sense of peace wash over me. The road ahead was still uncertain, but for the first time in years, I was excited about the future. With Helen by my side, I was ready to face whatever life had in store. The pancakes were getting cold, but I didn't mind. We had all the time in the world to make new memories, to build our unconventional family, and to embrace the second chance we'd been given.